Alrighty, welcome back, guys. My name is Noah Alcorn, and I am the co-host of Monday Morning Quarterbacks. Today, I'm once again here with my other co-host,
Yep. You're here with Mark, the other co-host of the Monday Morning Quarterbacks.
and today we're gonna dive in. Well, I say we. Mark's gonna really dive into some fantasy football analytics, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're just looking at numbers, we're looking at data, right?
Yeah,
Uh, we
definitely.
we've been playing fantasy football for I think 3 years now. I think it's been three
Yeah, three,
years.
three or four. Yeah, something like that. We
Yeah.
might be going into our fourth. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Although we do play just for fun with just our friends, and actually, maybe like a couple months ago, Mark actually got into a dynasty league, and there was a team open, and he invited me, so I joined. And just looking at all these numbers, and especially with dynasties, you kind of you got to build your future while building now, because who wants to not win now? I mean,
Yeah,
kind of.
definitely. Yeah, and just providing a little bit of extra background. So for so little again, just about us personally. So I actually graduated with a degree in math from college, and so that was so numbers have always been I've always really enjoyed those things, and then recently kind of transitioned into a career as a data analyst. I know one of the things that Noah kind of aspires to do in his job as well with his degree is to be able to use some type of analytics in sports as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think data is
So
everything.
yeah, so we so it kind of it I won't say it comes naturally to us, but we do enjoy looking at the numbers. And so for our fantasy football leagues, both of the ones that we're in, whether that's the competitive one with our friends or the one that we've just recently joined, that's Dynasty, they're 10-team PPR leagues. So what we were doing, and again, there's no super flex, no tight end premium, anything like that. So what we wanted to do is we kind of wanted to dive in, into some of the numbers from last year. And I don't know if anybody out there is like me, but I really enjoy fantasy football, so I've been doing a lot of draft prep already. Um, so that's kind of where this came from. Um, one of the things I've always been super interested in is the trends, right? The trends of the industry. And I didn't really understand it until I dove into the data. And so, one of the things that we want to talk to you guys about today is some of the different draft strategies that people have. Um, so, generally, Noah, right, with you, just what would you say in general is your draft strategy whenever you're drafting a team for fantasy football?
Just go for the best player ultimately,
Right.
because I was looking at I currently have the eighth pick in our fantasy, and it showed that Bijan is going to be there for me, and I'm probably going to take him. I mean, I know I do know what like 3 years ago when we first started. I remember, or even before that, like before getting into football, everyone was saying that running backs are the way of fantasy football. If you don't have a good running back, you don't have a good team. So when I think of fantasy football, I think of running backs. Running backs are the heart and soul of a team.
Right. And so what's really interesting is one of the industry trends lately, the past couple of years, has actually been a draft strategy called the zero RB strategy. So before we dive into that, one of the things I think is kind of an older notion that most people probably believe in with fantasy football, which has changed a little bit, but is about the quarterbacks. So I remember whenever we first started playing, again, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years ago when we were looking into it. Um, we actually have a cousin that's super into fantasy football,
Oh
and
yes.
one of the tips that he gave us was that look, like nobody should be taking quarterbacks before, like in a 15-round draft, nobody should be taking them before round like 9 or 10. Um, and so I think that's something that a lot of people do tend to follow. I think that the trend on that has changed a little bit recently due to the Patrick Mahomeses, the Jalen Hurtses, and the
Yeah, our
um,
first year, our friend Jackson takes Mahomes in the first round, and it kind of
yeah,
sort of screwed everybody up because, well, you got to have a good quarterback as your QB
yeah,
one.
that run started to go early on the quarterbacks for us, and it completely counter to what we had talked about, what we had been told. I mean, so what I wanted to do, I wanted to kind of show people this data real quick to understand maybe where that idea or that notion comes from. So there's a lot of data on here, but the big thing I want to be looking at is I want to look at the average ADP here, the true ranking here, and then this value score. So I'll go through each of those real quick. So ADP is pretty straightforward, right? That's the average ADP from the different sites. I believe this used ESPN, Sleeper, and Yahoo to figure out, about where those quarterbacks in this case were drafted. The true ranking is where they finished in terms of all players. So for a little bit of context here, right? Patrick Mahomes was drafted about player 15. He was on average the 15th player off the board, and his true ranking at the end of the year was he was the 13th best player in fantasy football amongst all players, so not just quarterbacks. This value score is calculated simply by subtracting the two, right? His ADP was 15.3, his true ranking was 13, so he outperformed his ADP by 2.3 positions, right? So hopefully everyone's following along and that part makes sense. Hopefully that's not, too much math for people.
So that,
If you see
that means he should have
oh,
been drafted at like the 13th best player instead of the 15th.
right, if there was going to be a redraft and you were just doing it based on total points, right, he should have gone player number 13.
Gotcha.
If you see a negative score, for example, a negative score means that player underperformed relative to where they were ranked. So take Joe Burrow. On average, Joe Burrow was being drafted as the 55th or the 56th best player in all of fantasy football. So again, think about that. That'd be between rounds 5 and 6, or is that in round 6? Right, he'd be taken in round 6. But where he finished was as player number 111, which is why his value score is negative 55. Now, we know what happened with Joe Burrow last year, right? He had his injury. But all that's baked into this, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
So looking here, you'll see you can see some players that are some extreme outliers. Of course, Aaron Rodgers. We all know what happened to him. 3 or 4 snaps into the season. So some of these numbers make sense. Anyway, so there's always context behind the numbers. But what we want to look at here is now the different tiers of these quarterbacks, and really the color coordinating was for me. But what I did is I took those value scores and just kind of averaged them together for basically the first 2 rounds, right? So for Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, their ADP was 15.3 and 20.3. Just kind of cutting those off, rounding those to 15 and to 20. Basically, those are the 2 quarterbacks on this list that would have been taken in the first 2 rounds, right? Does that track? That makes sense?
Yeah.
And so because of that, right, if I were to take their 2 value scores, their average value score was an 8.8. So they would have outperformed their value where they were drafted by about, by almost 9, right? 9 spots.
Yeah.
Next to, you look at these 2 quarterbacks, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, they actually might have been better picks, where they were, because they outperformed by, almost 26 spots. And that kind of tracks, right? Think about how Josh Allen went absolutely nuclear last year, right? He was the true ranking number 1. Lamar Jackson, again, also had an insane year. And actually this tier of quarterback had a higher, not only a higher average value score, but just higher average points. So without going too much into these, right, you can look at the different tiers and you could see, look, this Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence tier really underperformed. So last year, if you were taking one of these quarterbacks in the 4th or the 5th or the 6th rounds, probably weren't too happy with yourself, right?
Right.
When you could have waited and you could have gotten a Justin Fields or a Tua here that not only had higher average points but also outperformed. We all know really that's the point of fantasy, right? You want to get as many players that are going to score as many points on your team as possible. So you're always looking for value, right? And so what's really interesting is if you start to look at these average value scores as we go further down, you notice that when you get to this last round, right, these quarterbacks that are taken, they're either undrafted, maybe they're taken, down here in the 15th, 16th round, depending on how many rounds your draft has. Look at that average value score is almost 80 position points higher.
Yeah.
Right. So again, some context to these numbers, right? The easiest way I can put it is you could have taken Lamar Jackson as your QB number 1 at with the 38th pick. So that would have been towards the end of round 4, right? He would have scored you 338 total points last year. in order to take Lamar Jackson, you would have had to pass on somebody else that was in that range, a wide receiver, running back, tight end, right? You would have had to pass on somebody in the fourth round.
Right.
You could have taken Jordan Love last year in the, I mean,
Almost
he's the
almost undrafted.
almost undrafted, and you would have gotten only 8 points less.
Yeah, and you would have also gotten a, like we said, a running back or a receiver.
Yeah, you could have had a running back or a receiver there in the fourth round instead. So that just kind of is the high level of this, right? I think it's really interesting also to look at this bottom tier with Anthony Richardson in it. We know what happened with Anthony Richardson last year. Notice how his number for total points is actually bringing these average points down. If we were to remove him as an outlier, those average points there actually go up to 245 average points. So they would have been, this group down here would have been right on track with all the other tiers of quarterbacks, and you could have gotten them, so much lower.
Right. Right.
Um, Now, to me, that's the easy place to start because I think people inherently know that, right? People know, look, if I miss out on a Patrick Mahomes, a Jalen Hurts, a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson, I can just wait, right? I can just wait to the later rounds. I can get a Dak Prescott. I can get a Jared Goff who did a great job last year, and it's not going to put me at any kind of a crazy disadvantage. I think that people are more okay with that with quarterbacks, and it makes sense, right? It's how we've kind of been trained with the fantasy football mindset. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that, Noah?
Well, absolutely. I mean, like we said about taking Dak Prescott. As much as I hate him, or as much as I don't like him as a
As much as you
quarterback.
hate on him,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't hate. I think he's a great person, but as much as I hate him as a quarterback, I mean, look, he was the sixth best player in true ranking in the entire NFL. I mean,
yeah,
entire fantasy, and numbers don't lie. I mean, they don't. Whether I can't make that up. I mean, 352 points, taking him almost in the 10th round.
yeah, yeah.
That's
At the
huge.
at the start of the 10th round, yeah.
I mean, you would have gotten, shoot. I mean, I don't know. I guess we'll find out what player we could have gotten,
Yeah.
in the 10th round, or in the
Or let's say instead of a Patrick Mahomes at the midway through the second round, right?
yeah,
You
and
could
what
have
he
gotten
scored.
a top tier receiver
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Dak put up
and more
almost
points.
50 more points.
Yeah. And so the reason I start with quarterbacks is because this is something that we know. We know that this value makes sense. Now, we know numbers aren't everything. For example, we know that anybody that's towards the bottom of the tier, this average this value score is going to be higher because they're lower, right? There's more room at the top than at the bottom. Vice versa, if you start at the top, there's so much less room to improve. It's a lot more likely that you're going to not improve, right? So we know that those values make sense. But what I want to do now is I want to go over to running backs and take a look at these. So same thing here. Color coordination is different colors but same meaning, and we have the same sort of numbers here. Um, I want you to take a look at these running backs that were going in the first two rounds last year.
Wow.
Um, their their average value, all of their value, by the way, is negative.
Yeah, about.
In fact, it's supremely negative.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you look at the number one, Christian McCaffrey, negative 1.2. I mean, you can't.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would
that's
call that even if I'm being completely honest, right? In
yeah,
my
yeah,
mind, that's even.
yeah. Because what's negative? What's taking him from the fifth best player to
Yeah.
the first best player to the third best
Right,
player?
right, right. And yeah, if
Yeah,
you got him, if you could have drafted him second and someone drafted him third, I would say that's great. I wouldn't say it's great value. I would just say that's good luck, right?
yeah,
If you would agree with that.
yeah.
Um, but if we look at the rest of these guys that were taken in the top, right? And again, there's going to be some pretty interesting exercises we can do with these numbers here. Look at look at this. If you had Eckler on your team last year, you are probably not too happy with his performance. He
No,
was drafted as the fourth best player in fantasy, and he finished true ranking at 88.
yeah,
That's a yikes.
yeah.
Um,
Only had 185 points.
yeah, Bijan. I know we all talk about Bijan. I love him. I want him on my fantasy team. Last year he had the Arthur Smith curse, I guess, right? And he severely underperformed. Um, Saquon fighting injuries. Tony Pollard, we know Tony Pollard had his issues with Dallas where he couldn't cross the goal line. Josh Jacobs, who knows what I don't even know what
Yeah,
happened with him.
I really thought he was gonna be the Los Angeles, not Los. He's gonna be the Las Vegas's like almost true
Yeah,
weapon. I mean,
I
only
thought he was
weapon.
too. Yeah, between him and Devontae, I really thought that they were going to be the only two offensive weapons that that group had, right?
And I guess
Um,
not. I mean,
but it was bad. The only person in this tier I would say that lived up to expectations, and I use that pretty lightly, other than Christian McCaffrey, would be Derrick Henry, right?
yeah,
I think getting Derrick Henry at the turn, right? Because here you would have been able to get him at the end of the second, start of the third round, and you got the true ranking, 38th best running or 38th best player. I think that's pretty close. But these other ones were so bad. Even if you take a quick glance, right, some of the people that might not agree with some of this data might say, well, look, this first tier of running back still on average got you 242 points, right? Those averages are so much higher than these other groups,
hmm
which I would agree with. But what happens if we take out the outlier of Christian McCaffrey?
yeah. They're
You,
second.
you, yeah, you almost would have been better off waiting until the next round to get a running back. Now, that's where this zero RB strategy comes into play. I think a lot of people hear zero RB and they think, oh, people are just never taking a running back and only getting undrafted. Like, no, that's not what it means, right? Zero RB means you're not going to take a running back until somewhere around the seventh to eighth round. That's usually what the consensus is. So it doesn't mean you're getting out of there without a running back. It means you're getting through the first 7 rounds without a running back, if that makes sense.
hmm
Um, Now look at these tiers, right? We just went into detail on rounds 1 and 2 from last year. Here's rounds 3 and 4. Um, rounds 3 and 4, I don't think did much better. Obviously, they weren't as negative as the running backs that were taken in the first round, but you had some that were positive, right? ETN, he had a great year.
Yeah,
Um,
and some like I don't think like Hall. I really don't.
mhm,
I just I'm surprised that he was there because of Dalvin Cook. I mean, the hype around Dalvin Cook was pretty huge. I thought.
yeah,
Him coming with Rogers and them being the
yeah,
Jets' new offense. So
yeah,
to him be, as we
that
can see
high.
way down on the low on the list,
Yeah,
we can get there for Cook, but yeah, to see Hall actually be the 14th best player
mhm,
is pretty surprising.
yeah, yeah. And then the other one here would be Joe Mixon, and
hmm
if memory serves, Joe Mixon has never really had a great fantasy year, except for last year, right? I
Yeah.
think last year most people that had Joe Mixon were pleasantly surprised. I think if we were to do this exercise with earlier iterations of Joe Mixon, I don't think it was as high, right?
Mhm.
Um, but then again, some of these people, I remember Ramondre Stevenson was on my team last year. I was having a miserable time.
Who
I
he play for?
New England.
New
He played for the
England.
Patriots.
Wow.
And we'll get to his counterpart in a minute because if you remember what happened in New England, I don't know if it was that he got hurt, but you remember Zeke had a little bit of a resurgence for New England last year.
Right.
So we'll get to that when we get to Zeke. But Jonathan Taylor, we know
Yeah,
he got
and
injured.
well, it was
Mhm.
he was also his four games that he didn't play.
Yep.
And
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
that's
I
true too.
does that really? I mean, obviously it's gonna the numbers are gonna show here. What his true ranking was, but
Mhm.
I I mean I don't think he's that fantasy player that he once was 2 years ago.
No, no, I would agree. Is he still a top 10 running back for sure? But again, I think that whole question, now revolves around value again. Kenneth Walker had his injury problems last year. The only one here that was, relatively close, aside from the other ones we talked about, was Jameer Gibbs. And we know that Gibbs had kind of a rocky start in Detroit. But again, now we look at these running backs taken in now rounds 3 and 4. You get a little bit better value.
hmm
Um, But again, this is still kind of, if you want to look at this hit rate here, our hit rate in terms of running backs here in this round, you probably have one, two, three, four that you would have been okay with. And you have three that would have probably, let's be honest, tanked your season.
Absolutely, yeah.
Same thing up here, right? In the first two rounds, if you had Derrick Henry, you were probably okay. If you had McCaffrey, you were chilling. But you could have had one, two, three, four, five of the other, five of the seven running backs that could have potentially, um, you know, severely underperformed. Let's say. So your hit rate is getting a little bit better as you get to this third and fourth round,
Right.
right? Now this year in a lot of my draft research, people talk about the running back dead zone. Um, this I think would be what I would consider the running back dead zone if you look here. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
this is a horrendous tier for last year. And going into it, I don't know that people would have thought that way. Aaron Jones, I personally have never been high on Aaron Jones nor Najee Harris. Both of them underperformed last year.
Right.
Kamara, for all of the time that he missed, actually overperformed. I think if you had Kamara last year, you were actually happy with what he delivered when he returned.
Yeah, because he was
Right?
gone for what was it? Was it like
Was
8
it
games or
six
6?
games?
Might have
Yeah,
been 6.
Yeah,
It,
it
wa-
was
it,
quite
wa-
a
it was a
few.
lot, yeah.
Yeah, and he still ended up finishing, true ranking player 46.
Yeah.
So you're happy with that. Nick Chubb. I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
that's just unfortunate. I mean, breaking your leg.
yeah, yeah,
What can you do?
yeah. It's terrible. Um, yeah, no, I mean, what else can be said there? I know we had a person in our fantasy league who absolutely, like, his season was absolutely chalked once
Yeah.
Nick Chubb got hurt. That was his RB1, and it was terrible. Swift, probably the closest to meeting expectations, but again here, you notice our average here is pretty high. Mainly that's going to be because of Chubb and how much he underperformed. Right, if we take that out, I think it gets a little bit more in line. Um, but again, still probably lower than it should be. And these point totals, again, nowhere near on par with the people above or below.
Yeah, actually take a huge hit.
Yeah, took a huge hit. So that's rounds 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. And notice what happens whenever we get into rounds 7 and 8. Remember what the zero RB strategy is. Your
Yeah,
zero
you know,
RB strategy is you start taking them around round 7 and 8, right?
right.
So when we get to round 7 and 8, let's start to look at some of these people here.
Mhm.
Um, of course, you have some severe underperformers. Miles Sanders did not have the season I think a lot of people thought he was going to have.
No.
Damian Pierce also did not have the season that some people thought he was going to have.
Right, not at all.
Yeah, not at all. Those two, if you would have taken those two, you probably were not having a great year. Alexander Madison, I remember the discord around him at the beginning of the year last year being, hey, he's going to get the volume, but the guy's not very good,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And
Um,
yeah, I'll cut into this a little bit. I did have Madison at the very beginning. I think he back to back 20-point games, and I traded to get Kamara because I mean his value was high at the time, and obviously Kamara was coming back very soon, and I was good at my running back positions. So luckily I got out of that when I had him,
yeah,
but and then as we can see by the numbers, he kind of just sort of just tanked after that,
yeah,
severely tanked.
severely. Honestly, Javante Williams, this would be considered an underperformance, but honestly, pretty close. Again, I wouldn't call it too far off. But look at your hit rate here, right? So we just talked about, again, maybe three that were underperformers, right?
Mhm.
The other ones either were right about expected or higher, right? Pacheco. I would have loved to have Pacheco on my team last year.
Rashid White.
Rashad White went
Oh, Rashad White. Sorry.
crazy. Right. Yeah, he went insane. Went insane last year. Again, if you're telling me that I can draft the 26th best player in fantasy in the 7th round, give me that all day, right?
Absolutely.
James Cook outperformed. David Montgomery, we know that he did, he was going much better, kind of the Thunder to Jahmyr Gibbs Lightning, right? James Conner was steady as he goes. And then Kyron Williams kind of resurgence, or I should say ascension, right out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So look at your hit rate here. If you follow that zero RB strategy, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll throw Javante in there. 6, 7 running backs that you could have hit on here, and maybe only 3 landmines. That's a 70% hit rate if you're drafting in this range.
Right. Right.
Um, compared to the little bit lower hit rate that you have above, right? Um, now, I don't think I don't think Noah and I are going to say, we're not going to say Isaiah Pacheco is a better running back than Bijan Robinson, right?
No.
That's
No.
that's not going to happen. That's not what we're saying at all. Um, but you don't have to use that premium draft capital to get, you have Bijan Robinson that's going to get you 246 points and you're taking him in the first round. Or you could have Pacheco that's going to get you about 33 less points. So what does 33 less points equate to per game, right? You're talking 2-ish points per game.
Right. Right.
Um, and you're getting him 5 rounds later, 6 rounds
Yeah.
later.
And that allows you to possibly get that receiver.
Mhm.
Get that receiver or maybe the quarterback that you wanted a
For
little bit
sure.
up.
For sure. And if you notice, if we keep going right now, you have this tier of running backs, this Cam Akers, Dalvin Cook, that was horrendous.
Yeah.
If you had either of them on your team, you were not living a good life. But again, then we start to come down here, and you get into your hundreds. So what? This is the 11th and 12th round. You could have had Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane if you would have waited into to those rounds. Now, we know Achan had his injuries. Still finishes the 84th overall running back, or I'm sorry, player.
Right. Right.
Um, let's say that I was following zero RB. If last year I would have had Brian Robinson Jr., Devon Achan, and Raheem Mostert on my team, I was probably having a great year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And taking him the Mostert in what is that,
Yeah,
like the
that's the
12th round?
12th round. That's the
Right.
12th round. Yeah. The 12th round, and you're getting the 27th best player. Um, we come down into this next round and starting to get into the undrafted group. These aren't necessarily bad. You're not getting anybody here that's going crazy. In the undrafted round, some of these I specifically wanted to call out. I mean, look, you got Zeke down here. Again, would I have rather had Ramondre Stevenson way up here? Where was Ramondre at? Here in the middle of the third round, middle of the fourth round?
Mhm.
Or would I rather have Zeke, who I think actually had more points? Yeah, Ramondre is only 145. Zeke ended up having 174 points, and I could have got Zeke undrafted essentially.
Right. Yeah.
I
And probably
mean,
most leagues, yeah, undrafted.
yeah. And so, even if you look at the point totals here, you'll start to know some of these point totals are higher, if not on pace with some of those in the higher tiers. Um, and so think about the zero RB strategy, or think about drafting really as dart throws, right? Like everything's going to be a chance. So what you want to do is you want to maximize your chance to get the best players. And in this case down here with some of these running backs, they might not be the best players, but I think they would be the best players for that value.
Right. Yeah, no, because I mean value is everything, points is everything, right? That's what you're looking for.
Hmm.
And if you could draft a receiver, because I
Hmm.
think I think receivers are starting to. I think once we go to that column, we'll see a lot of true rankings. Probably we'll see them a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure.
but no, I mean, at first I was not like last season. You kind of attempted to do this, or you were talking about doing this, the zero running
Uh,
back strategy, and I don't. I think I took a receiver in the first round actually, but it kind of was like if you like maybe he knows what he's talking about, and maybe he knows what he's talking about, maybe he doesn't. But after looking at these numbers, right? Why draft Eckler?
Yeah,
Why draft Eckler with my second pick or something, third pick,
yeah.
something like that?
In this case, the fourth pick.
Yeah, with my fourth pick when I could have gotten what CD Lamb maybe. I
Oh
mean
yeah. Oh,
CD
exactly.
Lamb or
who ended up being,
Hill.
the one of one.
Yeah.
Um, and last year I wanted to do that zero RB strategy, but I think a lot of people in our league were kind of leaning that way. So I ended up taking Pollard and Gibbs. Um, Gibbs started out slow and Pollard had a terrible year. I was struggling. Um,
Yeah, that's
had
right.
I
You were
known,
actually.
right, I would have rather taken some shots at some receivers and waited to get me a Pacheco. I will say this: I really thought Damian Pierce was going to do well last year. He was one person I was targeting. I'm so glad I didn't get him. Um,
Right.
but yeah, so the other part of this is, like you said, Noah, with the wide receivers. So if we take a look at if we take a look at these different wide receivers, and we take a look at these tiers, um, what I kind of want to point out is, notice how, yeah, these numbers are still negative, right? Color coordination means the same thing, right? Rounds 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. But look how negative they are compared to the running backs. Negative 21, negative 22, negative 5. Look at the running backs. Negative
41.
41, negative 24, negative 74.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And again, if you start to talk about your hit rates, if you took Jamar Chase last year, which that was me, you probably weren't having as great a year because he wasn't living up to that first round status,
Mhm.
right? Tyreek Hill did. Diggs, yeah, he underperformed. He didn't underperform by that much. If you had Diggs, you were probably happy.
Yep.
You took Jefferson, probably weren't too happy because he missed his time with injuries.
Right. Absolutely.
AJ Brown, you were happy. CD Lamb, you were ecstatic.
I
He
mean,
finished number
yeah.
2 overall.
Yeah.
Amon Ra, breakout year.
Mhm.
Even Devontae, kind of a sneaky 29th best player. I wouldn't consider that underperforming by too much.
No, and
Now,
truthfully, if I look back at Adams,
mhm,
and even when I got him in that controversial trade that happened,
yeah,
um, still looking back at his quarterbacks when Jimmy G went down,
mhm,
still I don't obviously the numbers don't lie. He was the 29th best player, but I just don't think he was, in my opinion. Like I
yeah.
just don't think his numbers were there, but obviously they were.
It was just kind of sneaky.
Yeah, right.
So again, compare this to the running backs in the first round. You have a hit rate of, and again, we'll kind of like, I would say Diggs would be okay and Devontae would be okay, right?
Yeah.
So you would have a hit rate of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players that you'd be happy with. 6 of your what is this? 8 players, 9 players, 6 of your 9. So compare that to the running backs, where with your running backs, you were really only happy with maybe Eckler and Derrick Henry. Um,
Yeah,
so
McCaffrey
again,
yeah, McCaffrey.
oh, my bad. I meant I don't lie with Eckler. I meant McCaffrey. Yeah, McCaffrey and Henry.
Right.
Um, so your hit rate is going to be better with your receivers early on. Um, but things do get very interesting as we kind of start to go on in the draft. Okay. Again, Cooper Cup, I don't think we need to say too much, but he had a disappointing season, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we get
Coming
into
off of
this
injuries
next.
too.
Yes, definitely coming off of injuries. But that's all kind of baked in here,
Mhm.
right? Now you get to this next tier of wide receivers, and notice that these negatives, they start to get a little bit greater. Not a lot, but just enough, right? It's that you definitely have a tier down in terms of total points, right? We're just under 230 total points here, whereas we're 285 up here. But here's your rounds 3 and 4 receivers. You also notice that these are your rounds 5 and 6 receivers. Notice how similar these are,
Mhm.
but look at the difference in terms of where they were drafted versus where they finished.
Right.
This was a lot more kind of steady as you go group. So again, if you had a DJ Moore last year, you were probably happy. Brandon Ayuk, you were probably happy. T. Higgins, you're probably not, right?
Right. Yeah.
Waddle, probably not. But all of these players are so similar in ranking that, again, think about this as dart throws. If I'm taking wide receivers instead of running backs, look at how many more chances I have to get a player that's going to contribute to my team.
Absolutely.
Um, your worst one that you're seeing here is T. Higgins. Let's just take T. Higgins out of it, right? If you're looking at where all these players here finish, the worst I see aside from T Higgins is 123. So I'm sorry, is 123. But you look at the worst one after that's 80 at Jalen
Yeah.
Waddle, right?
Right.
Let's go back to the running backs in those next two tiers, right? The running backs in those next two tiers. I mean, there's a 287 again. So you want to take Nick Chubb out of it because of his horrific injury. That's fine.
Hmm.
I see a 128. I see a 121. I see a 107. I see an 83. I see some higher ones, Brees Hall, right? I do. But you also have so many more chances at getting some duds.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
So then,
Because I mean, look,
yeah.
because like we were saying, you take T Higgins out of the equation,
Hmm.
and I mean, if I were to take Chris Olave, right?
Yeah.
He obviously did not have that good of a year where he should have been, like his value score,
Right.
but he was still the fifth, like top 50 players.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
So
still top
like,
50.
so yes, he quote unquote, I mean, he
Yeah.
underperformed, but I would still be happy taking a receiver in the third round, fourth round, right there,
Yeah. Yeah.
beginning of the
This would be the
fourth
third,
round,
fourth.
and a
Yeah.
top 50 pick.
Yeah. Exactly. And maybe I'm not getting the same amount of value, but I'm getting better value than if I'm taking Ramondre, Jonathan Taylor, Kenneth Walker. I mean, honestly, even Jameer Gibbs, personally, I would have been more happy with Jameer Gibbs. But like the numbers kind of back this up that here you got about a 50-50 shot. Whereas with your wide receivers over here, you have it's a much larger range and a much better range,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Um, but what starts to get interesting about the receivers is that after this, they kind of drop off. So that's the other part about the zero RB strategy. Remember the zero RB strategy, the whole time that this thing shifts is around round 7 and 8, right? Once you get to round 7 and 8, now you kind of start to notice that we have some numbers that are a little bit all over the place.
Mhm.
Um, we could talk about each of these individually, but you have a lot more hits and a lot more misses here. Mike Evans last year, Michael Pittman last year, you were probably happy. Christian Watson,
Absolutely.
Jared Judy, Christian Kirk, you were probably not having a great year. And Godwin was probably right on pace, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So again, call this a 50-50 shot. You come down here to the next group. I know that these show that this was actually a positive group here. But again, tell me which of these players you really wanted on your team last year. Deontay Johnson, no thank you. Hollywood Brown, no thank you. Zay Flowers, I feel like everyone's still waiting for him to take off. Um, George Pickens, I think the best one is probably Jordan Addison, and that's because of the injury to Jefferson, right?
right. No, yeah, absolutely.
So again, now when these rounds start to shift, now your receivers, you're kind of getting below a 50-50 hit rate, right? In terms of now looking at these true rankings and who's good versus who's not.
Yeah,
Whereas we come over to the running backs, and again, you start to notice here the running backs, now this has shifted, right? Now you're having, better hit rates here. Miles Sanders and Damian Pierce, you take them out. Everybody else, we would have been happy with having them in those rounds.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Um, so I do think it's interesting, right? And then you definitely get into these lower tiers. Notice how these lower tiers are pretty bad. Let's be honest, if any of these are starting for your team last year, except for your one kind of savior,
yeah.
Puka
And
Nakua.
I don't think you can really account for him, say,
No.
being the 12th. I think that's someone that people probably did not draft,
Hmm.
and it looks like they did draft him, but they sort of drafted him as like a
I mean, it was almost
if
undrafted, right? This is the 14th round,
if he does good. That's whole like if.
right?
Same
Yeah,
thing
that's
with
the
Nico Collins.
Nico Collins is here too. Yeah, so I was just about to say. And so what's interesting here is, you look at these average totals here at 133. Um, if we were to take out Puka Nakua, Nico Collins, and Rasheed Rice out of there, look how much that drops,
Yeah, I
right?
mean,
I mean, I do not want a receiver in anything after because where are we at here? This is the 12th round. I want my receivers on my team to be set by the 12th round. If I'm going back and looking at this now, Could I have hit on Puka? Could I have hit on Nico? Could I have hit on Rasheed Rice? Sure, but that's a 3 out of whatever the rest of these is chance, right?
Yeah.
It's only a
So
30% hit rate.
so what you're saying is during these rounds and even like the
Mhm.
Adam Thielen, Odell Beckham round, we
Yeah,
should be taking running backs.
yeah, 100%. Again, I don't want any of these players. Taking all of these out of it. Again, these are now ADP after about 100. Let's go back to the running backs and look at the ADP after about 100. Now we're looking here, and again, think about the running backs that you could take here that you would have been happy with last year. We could have had a Brian Robinson Jr. We could have had a Devon Achane. We could have had a Raheem Mostert. We could have had a Zeke. We could have had a Jalen Warren, a Zach Moss, a Jerome Ford,
Yeah.
right? And look at their true rankings, right? I mean, the worst one of those I just called out is 99. You could have had them in these late rounds and in these discounts. I think the only time that it gets a little fuzzy for me personally is in those rounds 7 and 8 when you're supposed to start transitioning to running backs. I think that's when you start looking at best player available, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at these round 7 and 8 running backs here, and we look at the round 7 and 8 wide receivers here, I would
Yeah,
probably take Mike Evans and Michael Pittman over most of those other guys.
absolutely.
But if they're not there, give me Pacheco, give me White, give me Montgomery, give me Connor, give me Javante, give me Kyron.
Mhm. Yeah,
Right?
it's we didn't talk about this on the first episode, but well, we were talking about mainly about quarterbacks. But James Conner, he's
Uh-huh.
always, he was on a rough Cardinals team last year, and I feel like he's
Yeah.
always been a running back that has put up numbers, but for whatever
Mhm.
reason doesn't get the respect he deserves.
Yeah. Obviously, bell cow running back. Again, steady as he goes. He finished right about where he was drafted.
Yeah,
Everybody knows kind of right where he's going to go. You know what you're getting with him. Um, do you want him to be your RB1? Probably not. But if he's my RB2, and I'm getting him in the 8th round, I'm not mad at it.
right,
I'm not
absolutely.
mad at it. So that's kind of the idea is that in with your wide receivers, you're going to have more wide receivers in these first 6 rounds that are going to hit. Um, you're going to have more of these wide receivers. Again, just looking here, I can see Cooper Cup finished above 100. T Higgins finished above 100. That's it in the first 6 rounds for wide receivers. You go back to running backs, and if we look at running backs, in terms of true ranking, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 that finished above 100 overall, and some of those were, I mean, 287 for Nick Chubb, right? It's 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 just those hit rates. I think is really what it comes down to,
Yeah,
right?
and like what you mentioned before, I mean, running backs do their position, in my opinion, is harder physically on their
Hmm.
body, and with it being more physical on your body, you can be the strongest person ever, but there's just going to be always that chance of getting injured. Same thing
Yeah.
as we said with quarterbacks, like Lamar bringing more to the table, being able to extend the play more. I-
Yeah.
is a
Definitely.
value to you? Is a value to you worth it?
Right. And so I think to me, what makes the most sense after looking at this is I want to take as many dart throws as I can at my wide receivers, right? And then before I get to the 7th round, whenever I'm going to start taking anybody from this tier of running back, right? I want to have my wide receivers pick. I would like to have a top tier quarterback picked, right? Because that's the other thing. If I'm not taking running backs, so I'm not taking chances on running backs that are going to bust my team, I can get a top tier quarterback,
Yeah.
right? I can get a top tier tight end, which, again, if we look at the same thing for tight ends, we won't go through all of these, but you'll notice, again, all these positional values are negative for tight ends until you get to the later tight ends, which, mainly that's going to be because of like a Laporta, a Komet, and a, Kincaid, who just, did very well last year.
Mhm.
But I can get out of my first 6 rounds with 4 hopefully stud wide receivers, and I have, whatever that was, like a 67% hit rate on those. I can have my stud tight end, take your pick of who, right? And I can have my stud quarterback.
Yeah, and then in the later rounds, go for those running backs. take a chance
Yeah.
on a lot of those running backs.
Yeah. Then I would again rather now take my dart throws at the running backs here in the later rounds rather than the wide receivers, right? Because the wide receivers in the later rounds just fall off hard,
Yeah.
like hard. Um, Whereas here with the running backs, as long as you avoid this Cam Akers, Dalvin Cook tier, you have some better chances at some dart throws.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of what I think the numbers show. I do like the idea of a zero RB personally. I do think everybody has to keep in mind whenever they are drafting for their fantasy football season that sometimes it is also more beneficial to zig when others zag. So if a lot of people are following zero RB, it's hard to say no when you have McCaffrey, sitting at you, staring you in the face at if you're pick 8. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you get to the third round and Derrick Henry's still there, like, okay, that makes sense. But then you're getting that value back
Yeah,
because all of a
because
sudden that ADP goes from 20 to 30 and the true ranking is still 38. So now this is only a -8 instead of a -17.
mhm. So yeah.
Yeah,
No,
definitely.
looking at these numbers now, I completely agree with you, and maybe other people might see this and maybe think the same way.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting. I think it would be interesting to have a Discord about it, just because again, I didn't really see it until being able to go back and look again about how many of these wide receivers in the later rounds I'm sorry, running backs in the later rounds I would want to have, and how many of these wide receivers in the later rounds I do not want to have.
Right. Yeah. So like what you're saying, I mean, take the chances on the receivers in the early rounds, and then take the chances on the running backs in the later rounds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
So
it.
so like so the whole the whole philosophy is rounds 1 through 6
Hmm.
is you get that stud receiver, you
Yep.
get that stud quarterback,
Yep.
you get some options on receiver, and
Yep.
then if the tight end's available, you take them,
Uh-huh.
and
Yep.
then you kind of just keep the receivers at bay rounds 7 through 15, and you take running
Yep.
backs. And
Yes.
and if there
That
and if
that
there and if
yeah.
there is that quarterback and if there's that receiver that no one's taking for whatever reason, then you take him.
Hmm.
But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah. And I think anybody that wanted to try this and even mix together some of the other strategies, like if you're waiting on quarterbacks, right? Again, let's say I get out of the first 6 rounds with my stud wide receiver, my stud tight end. I still have, if I'm not taking a quarterback, I have 4 dart throws here with this group of wide receivers, 4 that I can take, right? Um, and even if those 4 wide receivers, that I get are disappointing, say I take, say with my number 1 overall pick, I took a Stephon Diggs, right, which I think you did last year, right?
Yeah.
Let's say I get a different tight end. Maybe I had a Kincaid last year or something that I took a little earlier than usual because I'm doing the strategy. Um, Even if my 4 dart throws are terrible, Cooper Cup, um, T Higgins, I mean those are the worst ones, right?
Yeah.
I would still be happy with that on my team. And then, I still could have gotten out of there with, say, Devonte Smith and an Amari Cooper, who, while they're not great, they're still good, right? They're not going to tank my season.
Yeah, they're
Um,
close to at least top 50.
right. They're close enough to top 50. And then I wait on my quarterbacks, right? I get lucky and get Jordan Love in the very last round or something like that. And then my running backs, I'm saving as many dart throws for my running backs to be able to take this group and just sling darts at them and hope that I get some good starters out of it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And that's the strategy.
Mm, almost sounds foolproof to me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Until you do it and you come in last, and then then it's not me. It's not on me.
Right, yeah.
It's the
It's
numbers. It's
just
the numbers.
yeah, but I mean like what you're saying, it's dart throws, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
somewhat of a strategy to it, but sometimes the wind blows a little bit too hard and you just
yeah.
miss.
There is luck involved, right?
Yeah.
It's not foolproof. If you were following the strategy last year and your dart throws were Cam Akers and Dalvin Cook, you probably had a terrible team,
Yep.
and it just is what it is.
Yeah. Go. Think for next year. Think for Tua.
Yeah, tank for Tua, honestly. Um, but yeah, I hope that I hope that you found that interesting. I know we were going to talk about it, and I think it would be interesting for everybody out there to give their opinion as well. I don't think it's foolproof. I don't know that the numbers 100% back it up, but it does shift my mindset when just looking at the raw numbers, to make me think that there is definitely some truth to it, and I can see where it came from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah. So yeah, if you guys found that beneficial, let us know. If you have some differing opinions on it, I think we'd love to hear them. Because again, we're just a bunch of Monday morning quarterbacks that just try to do our best when it comes to fantasy and talking about just all different topics. So that's what we had for this episode.
Alrighty, well, I think that was good. Like what Mark said, I mean, he kind of just I don't even know why I'm talking right now. He kind of put the bow on. Now I'm just untaking the bow. So I'm gonna put the bow back on, and we'll see you guys next time.
Perfect. Thanks everybody.